A 22-year-old woman from Ireland was recently left with severe internal injuries after her butt plug was pulled through her body during an MRI scan. She apparently believed she was safe to insert it before the procedure, believing the plug was made entirely of silicone. But it actually contained a metal core, causing it to react to the scanner's powerful magnets. She's expected to recover in the hospital, but this is why doctors always say you should never wear a butt plug while getting an MRI. In another ridiculous MRI case in 2023, a Brazilian lawyer tragically died after a scanner caused his gun to fire inside of the machine. After being repeatedly asked by doctors to remove all metal objects, Leandro Novaes decided not to reveal that he had a gun in his waistband, which ended up firing into his stomach. He spent several weeks in the hospital before succumbing to his costly bad decision. This case was a big reason why doctors always remind their patients to remove any firearms before receiving an MRI. This was the last photo ever taken of Marco Siffredi, the first man to descend Mount Everest on a snowboard. He was attempting his second descent in 2002 when Sherpas urged him not to go due to bad weather conditions, but Siffredi ignored their warnings and was never seen again. In 1999, Little League baseball player Kevin Stephen was hit in the chest by a baseball bat, causing his heart to suddenly stop. Luckily, off-duty nurse Penny Brown was in attendance and saved the boy's life by giving him CPR. 7 years later, Penny Brown was choking at a restaurant when one of the workers rushed over to give her the Heimlich maneuver, thus saving her life. That worker was Kevin Stephen. Jacques Hebert was a revolutionary French journalist during the Reign of Terror, who was heavily in favor of beheading anyone who disagreed with his radical views. After he accused Marie Antoinette of incest with her son, Hebert was sentenced to death via guillotine. He reportedly fainted several times on the way to his execution and screamed hysterically when placed under the blade. To amuse the crowd and make a statement, the executioners rigged the blade to stop inches from Hebert's neck. They did this 3 times before finally executing him on the 4th attempt. In 2016, Texas father Daniel Shaver was held up by police after he was seen pointing a pellet gun out of his hotel window. Several officers had rifles pointed at Schaefer in the hallway as he attempted to comply with them, but their commands were confusing and contradictory, especially since Shaver was drunk. For example, they told Shaver not to put his hands down for any reason before telling him to start crawling towards them. As Shaver was crawling and begging for his life, he reached back to pull his pants up and was killed instantly by Officer Philip Brailsford, who later claimed he thought Shaver was reaching for a weapon. Brailsford was charged with second-degree murder and found not guilty, since the full unedited footage wasn't released until hours after his acquittal. Brailsford was rehired by the department and reimbursed for all the medical expenses he paid while seeking treatment for the PTSD he claimed he acquired from the shooting. Because of this, Brailsford was medically retired and now collects a $2,500 pension every month. This 2022 photo shows 40-year-old Russian mother Anna Uskova moments before she jumped into a frozen river. She was apparently following a Christian Orthodox tradition of epiphany and believed that jumping into the frigid water would rid her of sin. However, she jumped in at a bad angle and was quickly swept away by the powerful current, trapping her under the ice. Her husband immediately jumped in to rescue her while their children screamed in horror, but his efforts were unsuccessful and her body was recovered 10 days later. This was the truck belonging to Missouri town bully Ken McElroy after he was killed in broad daylight by an angry mob in 1981. Over the course of his life, McElroy was accused of dozens of felonies, including assault, child molestation, burglary, animal cruelty, arson, and statutory rape. He always managed to escape serving time until eventually being convicted of attempted murder, but McElroy appealed and was released on bond before he immediately threatened to kill several people. An angry mob then showed up at the bar he was drinking at and shot him several times in his truck while he was attempting to leave. Despite over 40 different witnesses, nobody admitted to seeing the murder take place and no one has been charged to this day. In 2013, well-respected meteorologist Tim Samaras became the first storm chaser killed by a tornado along with his son Paul and friend Carl. The Oklahoma tornado expanded from 1 mile to 2.6 miles in about 30 seconds and was the largest ever recorded. It suddenly took a sharp turn towards the group, leaving them screaming their last words over the radio, "We're gonna die." These were the final photos of extreme cave diver Dave Shaw just moments before his final dive into South Africa's Bushman's Hole. He blacked out at 872 feet while retrieving a fellow diver's body, and his helmet cam recorded his demise. Osama bin Laden's son Omar was severely beaten by his father for smiling too widely when he was a young boy. He trained in Al-Qaeda camps starting at 14 years old, but left the terrorist organization in 2000 since he didn't support the idea of killing innocent civilians. In 2006, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail in her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. Here's a photo of Marine Sergeant Tyler Ziegel and his partner Renee Klein on their wedding day in 2006, before she would end up divorcing him just 1 year later due to his disfigurement. While on tour in Iraq, Ziegel was critically injured in a suicide bombing, losing his left hand, 3 fingers on his right hand, part of his skull, and sight in one eye, while his ears, nose, and lips were completely burnt off. Unable to work, he relied on benefits from the VA, but they paid him much less than expected, so he struggled financially. In 2012, Ziegel tragically died from an overdose on morphine and alcohol at the young age of 30. In 2023, a 17-year-old high school student from Florida died from an allergic reaction to pistachio nuts. She reportedly asked the staff if the baklava being served contained any nuts and was told no, despite baklava always being made with nuts. The girl immediately started showing signs of a severe reaction and was allowed to leave school to pick up some Benadryl from a local pharmacy, but the school never called 911. The teenager soon went into anaphylactic shock, slipped into a coma, and tragically passed away. Her family is now suing the school for $50,000 for their critical negligence. Ariana Grande reportedly has a longtime stalker named Paige Neiman who tries to impersonate the famous singer. She's been obsessed with Grande since she was 12 years old and has allegedly undergone several plastic surgeries to look like her despite being only 20 years old. When the Titanic sank, the richest passenger on board was business mogul John Jacob Astor IV, who had enough money in his bank account to build 30 Titanics. He ended up giving up his spot in the final lifeboat to instead save the lives of a random woman and her daughter. These were the last photos of Garrett Miller, taken just minutes before a soccer goalpost tipped over and struck him in the head, killing him instantly. In 2013, a family dog named Killian was protecting a baby boy from an abusive babysitter by standing between them and growling at her. This made the boy's parents suspicious of the babysitter, so they hid a recording device under the couch and heard her swearing at the baby while possibly shaking and slapping him. The sitter eventually pleaded guilty to assault and battery of a child and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. In September of 2000, Celtics legend Paul Pierce was stabbed 11 times during a bar fight in Boston. He suffered wounds to his face, neck, and back, but despite nearly dying and undergoing surgery to repair serious damage to his lungs, Pierce was the only Celtics player to play in all 82 games the following season. I don't know what's happening, I'm sorry. Years later, Pierce revealed that he was severely depressed after the stabbing, dealing with constant paranoia over crowds and PTSD from the near-death experience. In 1951, Edward Harrison was playing a round of golf in Washington State when his driver snapped and the shaft pierced his gooch. He staggered in excruciating pain for about 100 yards before collapsing and bleeding out. In 2001, a Canadian man was staying over his mother's house so he could attend his father's funeral. While cleaning the kitchen, he apparently tripped over the open dishwasher door and fell onto the rack of knives that were standing upwards. He was impaled by several knives and eventually succumbed to his wounds. In 1998, Lenny Dieriksen was eating breakfast with his 19-year-old son when a stranger suddenly showed up at their Oklahoma farm. Lenny went out and spoke with the man for several minutes before coming back inside and telling his son that the man wanted to look at one of his stud horses. But after leaving his home in the man's truck, Lenny never returned. He was apparently seen having lunch with the stranger at a local coffee shop a few hours later, but the trail went cold as the stud horse that Lenny mentioned was never visited that day. 6 months later, someone called 911 claiming he saw Lenny at a local bar, but he was gone before police could get there. The case remains unsolved to this day. In New Brunswick, Canada in 2013, 2 little boys were strangled to death by a 100-pound python while at a sleepover at their friend's house. The snake apparently snuck into the apartment through a vent connected to a pet shop below the boys' room. Experts claimed it's highly unlikely for a python to just go on a human killing spree, but the boys had gone to a petting zoo earlier in the day, so they may have smelled like food to the snake. The snake was euthanized, and the snake's owner was eventually found not guilty of negligent homicide. According to his memoir, when Vice President J.D. Vance was 12 years old, his drug-addicted mother was once driving erratically and threatened to crash her car to kill them both. J.D. had no choice but to jump out of the speeding vehicle and run to a nearby house for help. He now refers to this event as a turning point in his life, since it prompted him to move in with his non-abusive grandmother and work towards a more stable life. In the year 2000, Mexican woman Ines Ramirez performed an hour-long C-section on herself after suffering 12 hours of constant pain. Using a large kitchen knife, she made a 7-inch vertical incision and pulled the baby boy out of her own uterus. Despite no prior medical training, both Ramirez and her baby miraculously survived. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times in prison and eventually forgave him for killing her mother. When he was released on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave him a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she realized the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's home and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while running from police. In 1996, a stalker named Robert Dewey Hoskins told Madonna's assistants that he would slash her throat from ear to ear unless she married him. He then jumped the fence at the singer's home before being shot by a bodyguard, but survived and was arrested. Madonna would later testify against Hoskins in court, saying she felt sick to her stomach just being in the same room with him and had recurring nightmares about him chasing her. After being deemed highly psychotic and extremely violent, Hoskins was sent to a mental hospital, which he briefly escaped from in 2012. Just last year, a zookeeper from Uzbekistan was eaten alive while attempting to round up 3 lions that escaped from their enclosure. He apparently recorded the entire ordeal on his phone while attempting to impress his girlfriend, as his deathly screams could clearly be heard in the footage. Rescuers say they had no choice but to tranquilize 2 of the lions, while shooting the 3rd dead before finding the zookeeper's mangled remains. In 2013, a Swedish prisoner escaped from the facility because he had a severe toothache and was denied medical care. He broke out, saw a dentist who pulled out his tooth, and then turned himself back in. Starting when his son Uday was only 11 years old, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein often took the boy to witness his enemies being brutally tortured. These experiences apparently had a profound impact on young Uday, who grew up to become far worse than his father. His own relatives and personal acquaintances were reportedly terrified of him, since Uday was known to grape, torture, and murder anyone who disappointed him. During a dinner party in 1981, Uday murdered his dad's personal valet by repeatedly stabbing him with a carving knife in front of dozens of horrified guests. In 1995, Uday went on a shooting rampage at another party after his uncle made fun of his speech impediment. The shooting left 6 bodyguards dead and his uncle seriously injured, prompting Saddam to set his son's luxury car collection on fire. Uday was also known to arrest and torture Iraqi Olympic athletes when they didn't win a medal. In 2003, Uday was finally killed by an American task force at the age of 39. Last summer, 36-year-old Italian surfer Giuliana Manfrini died in a total freak accident while surfing off the coast of Indonesia. When she was catching a wave, a swordfish suddenly leaped out of the water and stabbed her directly in the chest with its bill. Despite immediate first aid from her surfing buddies and being rushed to a local hospital, she couldn't be saved. Here's the grave of a woman who chose to leave her name off and instead gave it the inscription, "I was somebody." She apparently told the cemetery sexton that eventually nobody would remember her anyway, so this inscription would at least be more memorable than she was. While on an African safari in 1963, Ernest Hemingway survived 2 plane crashes in a row. The first plane collided with a telephone wire and wound up in the Nile, leaving him with minor injuries. While Hemingway was being rescued from this first crash, the rescue plane also crashed. The plane caught on fire, so Ernest had to smash the door open with his head, causing extensive burns and a fractured skull. The novelist was presumed dead until he walked out of the jungle in high spirits, carrying bananas and a bottle of gin. Russian scientist Anatoly Bogorsky worked as a physicist on the largest particle accelerator in the Soviet Union. In 1978, he was checking a malfunctioning piece of equipment when one of the safety mechanisms failed, causing a high-energy proton beam to pass directly through his head. He reportedly saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, but didn't feel any pain. The beam had burned through parts of his skin, bone, and the brain tissue underneath, causing the left half of his face to swell up beyond recognition. Since it was believed that he received far more than a fatal dose of radiation, Bugorsky was taken to a clinic in Moscow where doctors could document his certain death. But miraculously, Bugorsky survived, completed his PhD, and continued working as a particle physicist. Nearly 50 years later, he's still alive to this day with relatively minor symptoms. This is the skull of a young girl whose remains were found in the trash deposit of a Jamestown fort building in 2013. As evidenced by the butchery marks seen on her forehead, she was believed to be the victim of cannibalism at the Jamestown colony in the winter of 1609. Known as the starving time, this period was marked by extreme desperation when it came to finding food due to a severe drought. The governor of Jamestown, George Percy, wrote that colonists ate horses, dogs, cats, vermin, and even dug up corpses from graves to consume. In one case, he reported that a man killed his pregnant wife, butchered her, preserved her with salt, and consumed her. Only 61 out of the original 500 colonists managed to survive the brutal winter. In 2016, a man who'd been continuously stalking Miranda Cosgrove apparently plotted to murder her. For 3 days, the stalker had been burying various weapons in Cosgrove's backyard, including knives and a rope. One day, he spent hours pacing around the area and eventually shot at a woman who looked like the iCarly actress. The man then performed self-immolation before turning the gun on himself right in Cosgrove's yard. Miranda has stated that she still lives in the same house but refuses to stay there alone ever since that traumatic incident. Earlier this year, inmates at a Miami prison managed to birth a child without ever even meeting each other face to face. 23-year-old Joanne DePaz and 29-year-old Daisy Link, both imprisoned for separate murder charges, started talking to each other through the air vents before falling in love and eventually wanting kids. Using a makeshift line made out of bedding, they passed Joanne's erectoplasm through the vents, while Daisy used a yeast infection applicator to inseminate herself. Against all odds, the plan worked, and the baby was born healthy. The pair are now in different prisons, while Joanne's mother is raising their baby girl. While investigating the illegal shark fin trade for the BBC special Gordon's Shark Bait in 2011, Gordon Ramsay and his crew were attacked by a group of men linked to drug networks in Costa Rica. They were held at gunpoint, doused with petrol, and told they would be killed if they continued filming. The shark fin trade continues to flourish to this day due to the high demand of shark fin soup, resulting in about 100 million sharks being killed every year. This was the obituary of Kathleen Demlow, who doesn't appear to be missed by her family. Here's a photo of Barbara Graham saying goodbye to her 2-year-old son Tommy before being executed via gas chamber in 1955. She was convicted for her part in the brutal murder of elderly widow Mabel Monahan during a home invasion gone wrong. In 1988, Hawaiian musician Israel Kana'i Kamakawiwo'ole called the owner of a recording studio at 3 a.m. when he was so eager to record his new idea. Despite having obviously closed for the night, the studio owner agreed since Israel was such a nice guy. Within 15 minutes, they recorded his ukulele rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow in just one take. Sadly, Israel struggled with morbid obesity throughout his life, at one point weighing over 750 pounds. After enduring several hospitalizations due to respiratory and cardiac issues, the legend would end up dying of respiratory failure at the young age of 38. In 1978, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen hosted a party in their New York City hotel room, the morning after which Nancy was found dead in the bathroom with a single stab wound to her abdomen. Despite being comatose on drugs the entire night and having zero recollection, Vicious admitted to the stabbing and was charged with her murder. Many believe that Nancy was actually killed by a drug dealer who was attempting to rob the drugged-up couple, and that Vicious was totally incapable of harming her considering the state he was in. But the bass player ended up dying of a drug overdose while out on bail before he could stand trial, and the case was closed. In 1996, Maryland woman Sharon Lapaka was killed in a bizarre case of consensual homicide. She had emailed dozens of men asking them to torture and kill her for mutual sexual gratification before meeting a man named Robert Glass who would follow through with her request. One morning, Sharon left her husband a note saying she would never return and told him not to track down her killer. Glass ended up strangling her to death and was soon arrested after police found the emails and discovered Sharon's body on his property. He admitted to fulfilling her torture fantasy, but also maintained that her death was an accident. Glass pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years before dying of a heart attack while in prison. A 71-year-old man from Africa has lived in total isolation for 55 years to stay away from women. At the age of 16, he locked himself into a home secured by a 15-foot fence to avoid any possible interactions with females. He reportedly suffers from gynophobia, an irrational fear of women. A 26-year-old mum from the UK has died after traveling to Turkey for a Brazilian butt lift. The official cause of death was a fat embolism after some of the injected fat apparently entered her bloodstream. Many health professionals consider BBLs to be barbaric procedures because of the significant health risks associated with them that are seldom discussed. In July of 1518, a French woman ran from her house and started dancing fervently in the street. Within a week, a few dozen others had joined her, and by the next month, hundreds fell victim to this dancing plague. They danced completely uncontrollably and seemingly without reason, often for days on end, until they collapsed from exhaustion or even died from heart attacks or strokes. Up to 400 people in total died before the phenomenon suddenly stopped. It's widely believed that the dancing plague was caused by stress-induced hysteria or poisoning from a wheat fungus called ergot. 1991, 11-year-old California girl J.C. Duggard was abducted by convicted sex offender Philip Garrido while waiting for her school bus. Garrido kept J.C. handcuffed in various tents and sheds that he built in his backyard where he would consistently abuse her. 7 months into her captivity, Garrido introduced J.C. to his wife Nancy, who brought the child a stuffed animal and chocolate milk while tearfully apologizing to her, but did nothing to free her. Instead, she helped her husband manipulate the young girl, at one point giving her 2 kittens before later taking them away. JC was eventually forced to bear a daughter at age 14 and another at 17, though she was never allowed to see a doctor. She remained missing for 18 years until a parole officer finally discovered her while investigating Garrido. He was sentenced to 431 years in prison, while his wife received 36 years to life. The state of California eventually awarded the Duggard family $20 million for its mishandling of the case. In 1994, 13-year-old Texas boy Nicholas Barkley went missing after playing basketball with some friends. 3 years later, he was found in Spain and reunited with his family, but something was very off. The boy who came back had darker hair, brown eyes instead of blue, and a French accent, while looking much older than Nicholas would have been at the time. But perhaps blinded by grief, the Barkley family accepted this boy without question despite these major differences. To be fair, he claimed his kidnappers had taken him to France, dyed his hair, and changed his eye color to hide his identity. But a private investigator would soon reveal the boy's true identity as Frederick Borden, a 23-year-old Frenchman with a history of impersonating missing kids. Borden had apparently been searching for love and affection that he never received as a child. Known as the Chameleon, he's assumed over 500 false identities throughout his life, including those of orphans. Meanwhile, the true fate of Nicholas Barkley remains unknown to this day.